Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Spare a Thought, the podcast that shines a light on the people, ideas, issues, and organisations that are often overlooked or misrepresented in the media. I'm your host, Tom Spare. Today, I'm trying out something a little bit different. Welcome to The Rewind, where I go back into the Spare a Thought archive to return to some of the most popular episodes and topics. Today's Rewind focuses on creativity with Briony Goffin, which was originally released on New Year's Day 2025. Briony is a writer, tutor and mentor. She teaches creative writing at Cardiff University and is a specialist in facilitating creative writing experiences in community and healthcare settings. I've been attending Briony's classes for close to 10 years. This episode tees up next week's episode, The Radical Act of Writing, perfectly. So here's my chat with Briony. Let's spare a thought for creativity.
Well, Briony Goffin, creative writing tutor and facilitator, based in Cardiff in South Wales.
Before we talk about creativity, could you tell me a little bit about yourself and where did you grow up?
My default answer to this is that I grew up in rural West Somerset within a family of artists, although it's not strictly true.
Oh, okay. This is the spin you put on it, Briony.
Yeah, the spin I put on it, but it captures an essence, I think, because as it was, my mum is the only artist in the family, and in actual fact, the only family in our household was my mum. I was an only child of a single parent, and yet every adult I knew was an artist, more or less, apart from, I don't know, the doctors and the teachers and that kind of thing. So I was very at home in an artist's studio. I love a paint spattered sink. I love a clay encrusted mug to drink my tea out of. And I think probably that my love of that environment, and because I feel so happy in an artist studio, was partly what inspired when I rebranded to become Cardiff Writer Studio, because I have such fond associations with studio life as a place of play and exploration. So yes, not entirely true that I grew up within a family of artists, but in terms of extended community around me, I did grow up with a big gang of creative people. And then in the late 90s, moved to Cardiff to do a undergraduate degree in psychology, followed shortly after by a postgrad in creative writing. To a certain extent, I've invented my own job, which kind of fuses the world of kind of relationships and hopefully seeking to understand people and how they work with creative expression. So I've kind of, brought both of those academic disciplines together and then kind of made them my own.
So I recently watched your TEDx video, and in that video you talked about writing being an act of honouring the flow of life, and in particular the people, places and moments that make up that flow. What did you mean by that?
I had to dig back into that myself, Tom. It was a long time ago I did that talk. But what is really heartening actually is to know that the ideas that are the foundation for all my work remain the same. And I think that particular line, well, the whole talk is called, I think, Writing as an Act of Tribute. It's either that or Writing as Tribute, which is about seeing the details as precious, seeing the details as significant and revealing of something. So that idea of kind of the extraordinary being in the ordinary and the beauty being in the everyday. So as writers, we don't need to have kind of climbed Everest to tell a really humane and affecting story. We could talk about our visit to the local charity shop, and in that story, we could change others or affect others. So yeah, it's about honouring the details. I heard an interview with the novelist Anne Tyler, a favourite novelist of mine, North American writer, writes a lot about the the world of the domestic, I guess. And I can't remember who was interviewing her. It may have been Desert Island Discs, but they asked her about how she plots her novels, and everybody's very fixated on the notion of plot. It's one of the first things students want to know about when they sign up for a course, like a 10-week course, is I really want to know how to plot my story. And I think it's because creativity, I think you mentioned, is kind of elusive. It's amorphous, and it's a bit scary not having control over something. So if we have a kind of a plan, we think, right, I can handle this, rather than handing it over to something that feels less predictable. So I always kind of shape my courses to sort of flip that on its head, and we look an awful lot at producing multi-textured worlds and multifaceted characters that have their kind of conflicts and their desires, and then hopefully witness how a story can go from and in relation to those things, rather than necessarily plotting something in advance. So yeah, Anne Tyler, her answer to the question was time. And I loved that. Just that single word was how she plots. And by that, I understand she meant that we are affected by our encounters, our experiences, and we change along the way. And it's nothing more complicated. There's no kind of trickery in that. It's just how we grow older day by day by day, and the insights and the challenges of that. And so I think that kind of relates a little bit to what I was referring to in terms of the flow of life. But I hope it is liberating for folk who come to my classes, that it's about the details, the micro, rather than necessarily having to have the big macro. So I'm using hand gestures, and I know more macro, and I know that won't get recorded. Yeah, I think that's what I meant.
My next question: creativity can often be very elusive, particularly for writers and artists, people who are making and crafting from scratch. I often say this quote, but Leonard Cohen once said that if I knew where the good ideas came from, I'd go there more often. Where do you go to get your ideas from?
I think it's about being alert and present enough to notice when something is snagging my attention. I think, I'm not wholly sure, but I think I quoted in my TEDx talk a writer called Anais Nin that people might know from either her erotic journals or indeed her kind of commentary on the creative process, particularly women's creativity. And she says something like, write the significant moment, because it will always have roots into the past and branches into the future. So I think if a detail or something snags my attention, makes me kind of wince, or makes my kind of heart leap, or arrests me in some way, there is a reason why it's caught my attention. If I allow myself to kind of explore and write into that, there will inevitably be narrative there, story there. I take a lot of photographs. I hate the sort of expression like being a keen photographer or something like that. It sounds a bit naff. But I've been taking photos since I was a child, and I think that has really helped sensitize me to the moment as well, sensitize me to being able to see, to frame something, to notice the different ingredients that make up a particular moment and make it kind of interesting, that it's kind of got some kind of contrast or something that is causing friction or working up against something. I think also it's maybe worth mentioning too that it's not just about where we get the ideas, but how we find the courage to express them, because lots of us might have the ideas, but then it's the challenge then about how we channel those onto the page as writers. And I can't remember if we were being recorded or not, but we were talking earlier about how we develop as artists, in inverted commas, as we get older. And for me, certainly that refers to voice, learning to use my voice, the voice that feels most spontaneous and true to me. So rather than seeking to impress, which would have been part of my kind of youth, to use a voice that actually feels much more authentic, which is maybe more conversational, which mixes the silly with the serious and the kind of, I don't know, the poignant stuff with the humorous stuff, which I think is much more kind of closer to the way I express myself. And actually, I think you are a recipient of the monthly newsletter. I would say, even though that is in essence a kind of a marketing vehicle, nonetheless, I have the pleasure of writing to an audience I really like and I really care about. And part of that monthly process of sort of telling them a little bit about, I don't know, my life and what I've been up to and my thoughts about it has been part of me learning to claim my own voice. So I think it's about kind of where we get our ideas. So being present enough to notice when something is catching your attention, and to kind of have the curiosity to investigate why it may be, by kind of allowing it to evolve and develop and to allow yourself to go on a journey with it. And then, voice, allowing you then to find a way to tell it in as truthful a, meaningful a way as possible.
The thing I've been thinking about recently, and I often think about my brother in this, is that he said recently that he finds himself becoming a better artist as he gets older. And I think that's something that isn't really talked about for writers, because you get, these big names that do well young. So I'm thinking like Zadie Smith or Sally Rooney or someone like that. And they're brilliant, and they have, they're the writers of their generation. But I also think that writing is an interesting area where you will always improve, and there's always you come with other life experiences, your life changes, and probably as your life changes, your characters do too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think lots of it is about hopefully accruing courage as you go to those places in a way that you might not when you were younger. You maybe let go of a particular vanity that you might have when you were younger. So you might wish to dazzle with all this sort of impressive language and sort of, I don't know, dazzling ideas. And then you discover actually it's not about that. It's about something sometimes quieter or less, less neon bright. It's more about something that is more humane, which is sometimes, I don't know, a bit uglier, but as you get older, you're more prepared to go to those places and write in a more bare way, maybe. But I think it's really important to think of ourselves as constantly evolving our relationship to our voice, to our material, and honing our craft. We've never reached that destination.
And I think it's this element of maturity. I've definitely found that I probably write less now, but what I do write is probably better, because I write it when I get that feeling that, oh yeah, I need to say this thing and I need to put it out into the world, or I need to share it with the group or whatever. So I'm quite enjoying that. And I'm quite enjoying being in my early 30s, because I feel like I'm still relatively young, but I also have a bit of life experience behind me as well. So that's quite a liberating.
Yeah, and you can kind of enjoy looking back with a different kind of relationship to what it means to be young, but also have a greater degree of empathy with people who are older than you, which when you were very young, you have less of.
8 years ago, I sent you an email, and I'll just read this. Dear Briony, I live in Cardiff and I'm interested in joining the creative writing classes at Chapter. Could you provide me with more details, please? Is there a sign-up taster session I can take part in? So 8 years later, I'm a veteran of your creative writing sessions. Not the longest serving member, but I'm sort of gone up into the upper tier now at Chapter Art Centre in Cardiff. Where and when did those creative writing classes start, and why did you want to run those workshops in the first place?
I've been teaching creative writing since about 2004, I think. I wish I'd realised that, because I could have made a really big deal of my 20-year anniversary just before. We're now in December, so I've left it maybe a bit late. And I was teaching at Cardiff University, and at that point in time, I was also doing a lot of creative writing groups in healthcare, in particular mental health care. So Lots of really rich, interesting things. But I think what I wanted to do is squarely take up my place in Cardiff as an independent sort of tutor slash facilitator. Chapter is part of my kind of history in Cardiff, and it certainly attracts thoughtful, interesting individuals. And so I thought that's a really good place to establish myself and also, I think possibly coin my particular methodology. I wanted a really sort of, establishment place to say, here I am and this is what I do, and to kind of make my mark. And dare I say also the Sunday writing sessions, we are so lucky to have people who are in their 80s in that space and people who are 18 in that space to share their stories inspired by the same prompt, bringing their own stuff to the page. And that, I mean, is just gorgeous to me, and is, I mean, you learn about humanity as well as writing via that process.
Yeah, and it's that intergenerational exchange, isn't it? Which I think is lacking in so much of our society, because we go far away from our families now. We don't sort of stay in the same places. We sort of go elsewhere. So I've definitely found that, and it's been such a joy to sort of be in the writing group, because you see people progress as well. That, like, you know, there's people like David who changes his career and he builds in writing, you know, into his life.
Yeah.
And that probably wouldn't have happened if he hadn't have come to the workshop. So, it's lovely to hear stories from different generations, because you realise, oh, a lot of these things have happened before. They've just happened in a different way, or it was in a different context, you know, and that's quite reassuring.
Or the 70-year-old still finds something kind of, I don't know, embarrassing or disappointing or nerve jangling in exactly the same way as I do. So yeah, that being able to experience that unity, I think, is really nice. And because of the nature of the sessions, it's very much about the quality of attention that everybody gives everybody else. So it is really deep listening and deep care shown for the other person. Whereas again, where in the world do we get that so much nowadays? We're either listening and doing something else at the same time, or we listen in fragments to something.
Can you tell us a little bit about Chapter itself, so people that aren't familiar with it? Because I met lots of people while I was studying who hadn't heard of Chapter, and I'm always quite excited when I can tell people about it.
I knew about Chapter before I even moved to Cardiff. So I had several adult artist friends who had lived in Cardiff in the past and had said, oh, Chapter's great. So even in the 90s, I was coming to Cardiff knowing that Chapter was a special place. So yes, it's an art centre with a gallery, a theatre, a series of cinemas. Why I love it is it's full of freelancers sitting there with their laptops and their notebooks, but it's been a really lovely place for me to go over the years by myself, which feels a very safe place to sit with a pile of work and a soup without feeling that I'm taking up anybody's space necessarily. It has that really permissive atmosphere, and I love the energy of being surrounded by other similar people.
It was a school before, right? Before it was Chapter. Yeah. So it's still got that vibe upstairs.
I love it. Still got the big flaky painty radiators. It's College Primary School. I don't actually know. I don't think it was a primary school. I think it was Canton High School, possibly. But yes, I love all those original details that make it feel kind of schooly. The tiles and the big radiators and the old-fashioned windows.
Yeah, my friend Sinead used to do her ballet classes there, and I know from time to time we've come out of sessions, and then there's all these little ballerinas lined up ready to go into class, which is always really cute. And then she then has taken her sisters. You know, she's got a range of sisters at different ages. Yeah, she's taken them to ballet. So I think there's this sort of, again, it's a very intergenerational space, isn't it?
Generational, and I would add to that also. From my point of view, I hope it is felt this way by others, but it feels like a very open to community space. Whereas lots of art centres, I think, can feel a bit intimidating, a bit highfalutin, whereas it does feel like it is used as a real kind of community hub, such as the ballet lessons and the other kind of community groups that take place there. So I think, yeah, compared to the other art centres that I know and have kind of grown up around, it does feel like it has that accessibility that is also adds to my fondness, I think, of it.
You facilitate the writing workshops. You teach at Cardiff University and run Cardiff Writer Studio. Could you tell me a little bit about your approach to facilitating writing sessions? Because one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you is that we hear a lot about writers and their struggle and, you know, where they got to and who inspired them and whatnot. But we don't necessarily hear from the people that teach them or facilitate their creativity. So, yeah, it's probably revealing a little bit behind the curtain, and perhaps you don't want to share all your secrets. But what's your approach to facilitation?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the important thing, Tom, is my approach. And lots of people have other approaches which are equally effective. And it goes back to that idea of voice, really. I have to work in a way that is aligned with my voice and my values. Have you heard or do you know of the child psychologist John Bowlby, who had, I think it was a long time ago now, had this idea of attachment theory. And the idea being that if you're securely attached, most likely you have a safe base created by a family, and therefore from that safe base you could develop independence and take flight. To a certain extent, that's what I do with the classes, is that I hopefully, because it's all about safety, I think, in essence, it's all about safety. And I think if I could create a really safe space, students can then take flight. They can allow their imagination to go where it needs to or wants to go. They can open up those memories that haven't been looked at for a while, or see them from a different perspective. So yeah, I think safety is everything, because these things are kind of risky, aren't they? To see oneself on the page, to open something up, to allow something that has been inside of ourselves and bring it out into the outside world. And in my case, also to do it in a group of people, lots of which will be strangers to the other students. And I think basically I've thought, well, what do I need to feel creative? I need to feel like the stakes are low to get started. So that's kind of like maybe the peak behind the curtain, is that, yeah, I know I need to feel safe in order to then feel aspirational or ambitious or even excited by something. Otherwise, that can feel quite a chaotic feeling if you don't feel like your feet are also on the ground. The bit that you will be very aware of is that I'm very clear every session to establish the ground rules, whether people have been to a session or not. And those are essentially that the environment has nothing whatsoever to do with criticism or judgment, and that it is my belief that it is impossible to place a value judgment on writing that is still raw and not yet been shaped or polished, that we treat everything as fiction. So if I use an example, if a student had referred to their father or a father in our conversation and feedback, we refer to the father character. And if the writer has used the first person, so I, we refer to the narrator in the piece. And that just means that all our conversations remain about the writing and not about people's lives and experiences or their backstory. And so that just means that it very clearly establishes this as a creative writing experience and nothing else. And then finally, I remind everybody that to have a degree of privacy around us as well, in order to produce work of of depth and value, we often have to go to some tender places as writers. So we need to know that we are being respected and taken care of in that space, and that there won't be chit chat following the session. So all those sort of conditions are in place, with the understanding that the safer the writer feels, the more able they are to write their truth, whatever truth means to them. And I'm always very keen to say at the beginning, as you will, well, Tom, you'll be able to quote back my spiel to me, I'm sure, but that we treat every exercise as simply an opening up opportunity at that moment. So an opening up in relation to the subject matter, and an opening up in relation to who we are as a writer in that moment. Again, without judgment, just with curiosity, with a sense of, this is where we are at. And then with a really big emphasis on beginnings. We are there to amass lots of fresh writing material, whether it is entirely kind of beginning something new or pushing forward an established project. So there's no pressure to have anything polished or complete. It is simply, it should feel like it's all about possibility. Yeah, so safety, first and foremost, establishing those rules so that everybody knows exactly what they are. They do get tweaked every now and again. When I hear what people have said have been particularly useful, I want everyone to feel as kind of safe, obviously, as possible. So they do evolve, and I kind of take things off and add things to help those individuals. So yeah, I think that's what I think is most important, is safety and keeping the stakes low. And then that writer can rocket up into the sky if they wish, or able to at that moment.
Because it gives people permission to write, rather than to get in their heads about what's a perfect piece of writing. And I've learned a lot from you and your sessions about just letting go and just seeing what happens. And if I have a good day, I have a good day. If it's not necessarily what I feel is a good piece, but then someone will pick up on, because probably to explain as well, is that we do, you set the prompts, we write, we have a break, and then we come back and read aloud. And that can be very scary, but I've just come to really enjoy it. I generally, I try and sit in the middle these days, because then I can listen, do my bit, and then listen again. Because it's a lot of energy taking in everyone's work, and trying to contribute and be an active listener, which I think's benefited me in doing these interviews. Actually, it's probably doing all those sessions of listening to other people's work.
I often wish that I could do some kind of brain scan during the times that we're listening, because I'm sure beautiful things are taking place in our brains as we listen to one another and pull together those comments and spot themes and patterns and things that are happening. I'm sure we are staving off all kinds of things as we listen. It's a shame I forgot to kind of do those initial brain scans now and then in 30 years time to prove it. But yeah, I've got a feeling it must be really good for our brain's biology, as well as our well-being and our creativity.
I'm envious of new people who come to workshops. There's nothing quite like joining a workshop for the very first time. There's something quite pure about it, something exciting. What advice would you give to new writers or people who haven't written creatively for a long time? Where's the best place to start?
Well, again, yes, certainly advise everybody. I'm very clear in all my teaching. So whether, I referred to plot earlier, and people sort of say, should I plot first, or should I just start writing and see where it takes me? And I'm very keen that everybody discovers what works for them, that there isn't a right or wrong way. So whatever works for them and keeps them feeling or enables them to feel productive and excited by what's coming out, that's what's the best way. But in terms of advice, I would probably suggest, if you haven't written for a long time, start with an image or a sensation rather than an idea. Because if you start with an idea, it's very easy to kind of get tied up in knots and it becomes very abstract. Whereas if you start with an image or a sensation and really enjoy creating a world on the page made up of all those juicy ingredients, then things will unfold from there. I would also suggest not worrying too much about, which I know sounds like a paradox given what I do, but not worrying too much about the language. Tell the story, the language. You can kind of tweak and shift all of that afterwards, but just allow the story and the world and the people to take precedence, and everything else will follow. I often band around this quote, which I say it's a quote. I say it sometimes and forget to source it, but I stole it from the Scottish Books Trust Twitter feed in about 2011, maybe, which is the first draft is always perfect because all the first draft has to do is exist. And I think we really place an emphasis on process as part of our groups, and that you can't bypass the process. It has to feel a bit messy. It has to feel like we're still a little bit at arm's length from where we're trying to get to. But then you have the real pleasure of kind of distilling something or expanding something to get closer and closer to the essence of what you want to say. But I know that I find that quote really reassuring, in that first draft is a step on the way to the next draft and the next draft, and eventually, if you're able and allow yourself to, you'll get there. But that feels again that it's taking the high stakes out of the process. And then the other thing I think is, you will know that I come equipped with lots of opening lines relating to a kind of a particular subject. Even the subject itself is not necessarily relevant. The writer can kind of disregard it or travel far from it across a course of a session. But these opening lines, well, if I give an example, I'm useless at thinking of things on the spot, but let's say the subject is windows. And so I might provide a series of opening lines that relate to windows. So such as, she stood in front of the window, he knocked on the window, the curtains were still open, there was a crack in the window pane. And then the students are invited to pick one or several of those openers and see where it carries them off to. And the idea of that opening line is it takes away the stage fright. It takes away that idea of the blank page being so intimidating that you don't quite know where to get started. So I see it a little bit like a kind of a ramp. And so if I kind of help by kind of pushing a student up a ramp, and then they can freewheel down the other side with their own stuff. But already what it does is, I guess, align the writing hand with the mind by just simply starting to copy that line out, and then they can then follow with their own material. So that also helps, I think, those who haven't ever written before or haven't written in a long time, by taking out the fear of that big white page.
If our listeners are interested in attending a workshop and a class, I will say as well that you obviously have the chapter sessions, but also online as well, and then you do different types of classes and exercises as well. Is there any other elements of what you do that you want to talk about as well? Because you've got as part of Cardiff Writers Workshop.
I'm very lucky to spend my Fridays with a remarkable group of people, several of which you know, which is called Friday Writers Club, which are people with established projects who submit their writing a week in advance of every session, and then they get a whole hour of feedback just on the work that they have submitted, with a view to helping them develop it into the strongest piece of writing it can be. So that is Friday Writers Club. I do, as much as possible, though we haven't had one for a long time, I do a Saturday retreat, which is a long workshop where we can do more than one exercise and go more deeply into it. Yeah, I think that's the main body of Cardiff Writer Studio. And as you said, it's important to acknowledge the Zoom sessions, because we spoke a lot about chapter, but the Zoom sessions, as with so many people, were established during the pandemic. And I'm very quick to defend Zoom. Lots of people, I understandably have got a little bit weary of things online, but it has allowed people to access these workshops who otherwise would never access them, whether it's geographically or for other reasons. And they are really intimate. I think there's something really special about them, in so much as we're all coming from our own homes. But also, I mean, lots of the people who are regulars and have been coming for years, I've never met in person. And yet I feel so close to, as a consequence of listening to their stories week by week. And we don't know necessarily if people are kind of married or what they do for their jobs or whether they've got kids or not. Their writing is all in that moment. And so it's an extraordinary kind of closeness you can feel, even if it's in rather artificial kind of circumstances.
Thank you, Briony. Thanks for taking part.
Pleasure. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for listening to Spare a Thought. My thanks to Briony for coming onto the show. The title track for this show is Young Shall Grow. Credit and thanks to Afro Cluster, Magugu and Asha Jane. The show was researched, written and edited by myself, Tom Spare, with additional editing and production by Lily Mott. This has been a Be the Change Media Network production. Thanks for listening.
Whether you like them or not, young shall grow. Better fill them with love. Then them go know in this life you don't give up.